You know I love you, man, you know.
This marriage is just a cover, right? Those words slipped through the crack in the door and stuck deep in my chest. Over the sound of the bathroom fan and the rain tapping outside, my husband's light, laughing voice came through so clearly. My hands shook around the hot mug I was holding, and all the loneliness and trust I had been swallowing my whole life suddenly collapsed right there. The years I believed were love turned, in an instant, into paperwork, insurance, and house value in my mind, and I could hardly breathe. I felt wronged and heartbroken, but that day, for the first time, I chose not to run away and decided to find out the truth to the very end. Why I ended up choosing myself instead of my husband. I will slowly tell you that story now. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. My name is Helen Brooks, and I'm 68 years old. I've lived my entire life in Tacoma, Washington. After retiring from running a hair salon, I'd gotten used to living alone. That night seemed ordinary enough. Winter rain drummed against the windows in a steady rhythm. I was in the kitchen, steeping some herbal tea, about to head upstairs to my bedroom. The guest room door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar, and I could hear my husband Mark's low voice drifting out. He was on the phone with someone. I was about to walk past when one sentence stopped me in my tracks. Mark said, "Babe, it's just a cover marriage. Once the paperwork is done, we're good." Cover marriage. Those words hit me like a nail driven straight into my ear. The mug in my hand slipped slightly and hit the hallway table with a sharp thud. The door closed immediately. I made my way downstairs and sank onto the living room sofa. The television was off, and the only sound was the wall clock ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It seemed louder than my own heartbeat. I thought back over the past 3 years. I'd first met Mark at a volunteer program at a nursing home downtown. He worked there as a caretaker. "It's dangerous for you to live alone," he'd said with a smile. I could still picture his face. Even after we remarried, though we lived in the same house, Mark would always watch TV on the couch, and then say he was tired before retreating to a different room. Physical intimacy was almost non-existent. A handshake-like handhold was about all we ever shared. What Mark did care about, though, was paperwork. His eyes would light up whenever we talked about health insurance, house titles, or bank accounts. "We need to get the paperwork sorted so we're both comfortable," he'd say often. I'd thought that was just what love looked like at our age. Stability mattered more than romance, after all. But the words I just heard on that phone call kept replaying in my mind. Mark had said, "She thinks this is about love. I just needed a safe place and insurance." I paced back and forth between the kitchen and living room in my bare feet. The cold hardwood floor stung my soles. I tried to convince myself I must have heard wrong. Then from upstairs, I heard it again. "Once the house title is in both our names, I can finally breathe." I froze right there. My hands turned ice cold. The rain kept drumming on the windows, and I stood alone in the darkness. Had I been nothing more than paperwork to him? As that thought filled my mind, tears began streaming down my face. The next morning, I sat in a small cafe near downtown Tacoma. Rain poured down outside the window, and steam rose from my coffee cup. But I had no desire to drink it. 2 months ago, right at this same table, Mark had said something I remembered clearly. "Helen, you shouldn't grow old alone. Let me be there for you." I also remembered how he'd started to reach for my hand, then pulled back. Not much changed after we married. Mark would come home late, claiming he had night shifts at the nursing home. His clothes would smell of cologne mixed with coffee. I'd assumed it was just the nursing home smell. Around 2 in the morning, when I'd get thirsty and go to the refrigerator for water, I'd sometimes see Mark's phone light up on the living room couch. Notifications would flash briefly. Ryan with a heart emoji, "My love," words like that. I'd thought to myself at the time, men these days are so expressive with each other. That's how I'd fooled myself and moved on. Every evening I'd prepare chicken soup and salad. Mark would thank me, but then say he was too tired and wanted to rest alone in his room. He never crossed the threshold into my bedroom. Instead, the words that came up often were joint bank account, survivor benefits, house title. We need to sort these things out. So we're both comfortable when we're older, he'd say. For 10 years after losing my husband, I'd been alone. Shopping by myself at Safeway. Coming home to watch TV through those lonely evenings. The memories flooded back, and I told myself, well, growing old together like this is good enough. Outside the cafe window, I watched a couple around my age, holding hands as they crossed the street. Suddenly I felt like I was in a different movie from everyone else. Right then, a notification popped up on my phone. Pierce County Auditor, a change has been recorded on your property title. When I got home, I opened my laptop with trembling hands. I logged onto the Pierce County official website and clicked on the property search menu. The sound of my mouse clicking seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. I typed in my address and hit the search button. The few seconds of loading felt like an eternity. Then the words appeared on screen. Owner Helen Brooks and Mark Evans, joint tenancy. I couldn't breathe. This was the townhouse I'd saved for my entire life, bought with my own money. Somehow, at some point, Mark's name had slipped in next to mine like a half-owner. I scrolled down and saw something even more shocking. There was an unfamiliar bank name with a home equity line of credit listed. I muttered to myself, I never signed papers for a loan like this. Suddenly I remembered a night a few weeks ago. Mark had placed a stack of papers on the dining table and said, this is just health insurance consent and emergency contact stuff. Just sign here in a few places. He'd rushed me. I hadn't read it carefully. I'd just picked up the pen and signed. Mark had immediately stuffed those papers into his backpack. I searched through my file cabinet. There were no copies of those documents. Of course not. Mark had taken everything. That night, Mark went into the bathroom to shower. I could hear the water running. I made a decision. I need to check this myself now. Remembering the passcode Mark often used, I unlocked his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen properly. The text conversation at the top was with someone named Ryan Cole. The moment I read the messages, my heart sank. A text from Ryan read, once her name is with yours, we can pull a line of credit. Mark had replied, she's just my cover, babe. Our real life starts after the paperwork. I took photos of that screen with my own phone, one by one. My fingers trembled so much the pictures came out slightly blurred. The shutter sound seemed so loud I worried Mark might hear it. I scrolled down further. There were other conversations. Once the house title goes through, the bank will approve the loan. She's basically our insurance. Insurance. I wasn't a beloved wife. I was insurance. After saving all the photos, I put his phone back where it was. The water stopped running in the bathroom. I quickly went to the living room and sat on the couch. When Mark came out of the bathroom, I pretended to be watching television. But I couldn't see what was on the screen at all. My head was filled with the text messages I'd just seen. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking over and over. You used paperwork on me, so I'll use paperwork to finish this. At 5 in the morning, I heard birds chirping outside. I got out of bed and started writing notes. County property records, text messages, loan documents. I organized everything one by one. I vowed I wouldn't just sit there as a victim anymore. The next morning, I headed to the community center near Tacoma City Hall. I was meeting my longtime friend Linda Morales. She'd retired from working at the city's social services department. When I met Linda at the coffee shop, I spoke first. Linda, I think I'm in a fake marriage. Linda set down her coffee cup and looked me straight in the eye. Did you check the title and any loans? I spread out the printed property records and text message. Screenshots on the table. The rustling of papers was soft. Linda read through everything slowly, then let out a deep sigh. This isn't just a bad marriage. This is a plan. Her words made my heart sink. Linda pulled out a phone number from an old diary. Legal Aid Society, she said. These free lawyers are pretty good. Call them today. That afternoon, I went to the legal aid office. It was on the second floor of a gray building. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the hallway as I climbed the stairs. I met attorney Angela Price. She appeared to be in her early 40s with a calm demeanor. She looked through the documents I'd brought and pulled out a yellow highlighter. She drew lines under phrases like cover marriage and she's just my cover. Then she said quietly, if we can prove there was no genuine marriage. Intent from the beginning, we can pursue an annulment. Annulment. Hearing that word, my shoulders straightened a bit. Angela asked again, do you remember any coffee shops or motels they used to go to together? Credit card statements and CCTV footage would be helpful. Linda, who'd been listening, spoke up. There's that little cafe near the Tacoma waterfront, where the two of them were always together. The owner is particular about cameras, probably kept the footage. The three of us divided up tasks. I would print out my credit card statements and mark where Mark and Ryan had made purchases together. Linda would visit the cafe to check if past footage was available. Angela would prepare the evidence list needed for court and guide me on recording strategy. Walking out of the legal aid building, I felt for the first time like I wasn't a victim but someone making a plan. The wind was cold, but my heart felt warm. Walking down the sidewalk, Linda said, Helen, you're a strong person. This time, you're going to end this with paperwork. I nodded. Yes, this time I'm going all the way. That evening when I got home and lay in bed, sleep didn't come. But this time it wasn't from anxiety. My mind was just busy making plans. Outside I could hear cars driving past. A dog barking in the distance. I closed my eyes and made a silent vow. Now it's your turn. I'm going to end you with paperwork. A few days later, I went to the local coffee shop near Tacoma waterfront. It was a quiet afternoon after the lunch rush. As Linda and I walked in, the espresso machine hissed. I approached the counter and showed the owner photos on my phone. You've seen these two men often, right? This man is my husband, and this one is. My voice faltered. The owner looked closely at the photo and nodded. His brother? I always thought they were just close brothers. I took a deep breath and spoke honestly. They're not brothers. This man is my husband, and that man is his partner. A silence fell. The conversations in the coffee shop seemed distant. The owner tapped his fingers on the counter awkwardly. Tap tap tap, a rhythmic sound. He spoke carefully. If it helps you, I can check last month's footage. I keep it for a while. The owner led us to a small back office. The sound of him typing dates into the computer clicked away. The screen loaded, and the video began playing. I could see Mark and Ryan sitting on the corner sofa. They were holding hands. They were looking at the Tacoma waterfront view and laughing. The owner turned up the volume. Clear as day through the speakers came Mark's voice. Once the title is in both our names, the bank will give us the line. She's basically our insurance. I bit my lip hard. Tears threatened, but I held them back. The owner paused the screen and asked quietly, do you need a copy of this part? Yes, please. My voice trembled but was firm. A few days after that, following Angela's advice, I texted Mark. Let's have dinner, the three of us, with Linda too. I chose the same coffee shop as the location. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early and sat at a corner table. Inside my bag, a small recorder was turned on. I could see the red light blinking. Mark and Ryan walked in. The sound of the door opening was loud. Mark approached with an awkward smile, and Ryan stood a bit behind him with his arms crossed. Linda arrived soon after. The four of us sat around the table. I took a sip of water and spoke. Mark, we need to talk honestly today. At my opening words, Mark fidgeted with his water glass. His fingers drumming on the glass made soft tapping sounds. Ryan turned away almost completely. I pulled documents from my bag. Property records, text message screenshots, coffee shop CCTV images. I laid them out on the table one by one. The sound of papers hitting the table seemed unusually loud. Mark's face went pale, and in that moment, words burst from Mark's mouth. Fine. Yes, I'm gay. This marriage was never about romance. The space around us went quiet. Other customers glanced our way. I nodded quietly and said, I know. I know everything now. The air in the coffee shop felt frozen. Even the espresso machine sounds seemed distant. People around us whispered, but all I could hear was Mark's one sentence. I just needed to survive. Mark's hands shook as he continued. When I was young, I came out at work once and got fired immediately. My family kicked me out too. As I got older, rent, medical bills. There was nothing left. His voice cracked. I sat there quietly listening. Ryan chimed in. We weren't trying to hurt you. We just needed stability. We really love each other. I asked quietly but clearly, then why did my house, my savings have to be the foundation of your stability? Mark put down his water glass. You needed external security too. You said you were scared to live alone. I needed a house and insurance, you needed companionship. I thought it was win-win. At those words, tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted a person, and you wanted paperwork. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Linda reached over and held my hand. It felt warm. I asked again, when I die, who were you going to leave this house to? Ryan hesitated before confessing. We thought we'd use the equity for our cafe and Mark's medical bills. Later, I'd manage the house. I nodded slowly and said, you're free to build your life together. Just not on my back, not on my title. Mark tried to make excuses. But you were lonely. I was there for you. Doesn't that count for? I cut him off. You weren't there for me, you had me sign papers. Don't you see the difference? Silence fell. The coffee shop door opened and a bell chimed. I made my final quiet declaration. By the way, this entire conversation is being recorded. From now on, my lawyer will talk to you. Mark's face went white. Ryan pushed back his chair and stood up. The scraping sound was harsh. Linda said calmly, Helen isn't questioning your sexual orientation. She's questioning the fraud and calculation. I picked up my bag and stood. Looking at Mark one last time, I said, I'm not angry because you're gay. I'm angry because you saw me only as paperwork. Walking out of the coffee shop, cold wind hit my face. But my heart actually felt relieved. This is just the beginning, I thought. Linda patted my shoulder. You did well, Helen. Really well. I nodded. Breathing in the cold air deeply, I thought about the next step. Now I needed to finish this in court. A few weeks later, I stood in front of the Pierce County Superior Court in downtown Tacoma. The gray building seemed to pierce the sky. As I pushed through the doors, my footsteps echoed in the corridor. Angela Price was waiting for me. She opened her briefcase and showed me the complaint and evidence list. Papers rustled. We're filing for marriage annulment and property restoration together. Angela's words were calm. The documents contained everything I'd gathered. Text screenshots, coffee shop CCTV details, property title change records, loan documents, and transcripts from the recorded conversation. When I entered the courtroom, I felt nervous. I could hear my heart pounding. When the judge took his seat, the gallery went quiet. The judge asked Mark, at the time of marriage, did you intend to live as spouses in a genuine marital relationship? A long silence followed. The clock's second hand ticked. Mark lowered his head and said, No, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I did not. In the gallery, my hands trembled slightly. Linda squeezed my hand from beside me. The judge spoke firmly. The court does not condemn your sexual orientation. However, using a sham marriage to obtain housing and financial benefits at the expense of an elderly woman's life savings is serious misconduct. Hearing those words, tears streamed down my face. Everything I'd held back came pouring out. A few weeks later, the judgment arrived in my mailbox. The sound of tearing open the brown envelope rustled. My hands shook so much I could barely open it properly. I unfolded the first page. Marriage annulled. Property title restored to sole ownership of Helen Brooks. Defendant to pay damages. Reading those sentences, the heavy stone that had been lodged deep in my chest finally lifted. I took a deep breath. I visited the county auditor's office again. I received the newly issued title deed and read it. Owner Helen Brooks, sole. Only my name was printed there clearly. Looking at those words, I found myself smiling. This is really my house, I thought. Linda smiled beside me and said, Now. Your name is exactly where it should have stayed. On your own house, alone. On the bus ride home, I kept the judgment envelope on my lap. The Tacoma streets passed by outside the window. Then my phone vibrated. A text from Mark. Please, just one last meeting. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Okay, this is the last time. I met Mark for the last time at a small neighborhood park in Tacoma. It was the bench where we used to walk together. Cold wind rustled through the tree branches. Dry leaves scraped along the ground. Mark stood there in a worn parka with his hat pulled low. He looked more gaunt than before. I sat down on the bench, and Mark carefully sat beside me. I'm sorry, Helen. I really am. I just didn't know how else to survive. Mark's voice trembled. I said quietly, You're not the only one who was trying to survive. I was too. 3 years ago, Mark had said something to me. I remembered it now. He'd said, "We need to get the paperwork done so life gets easier." I returned those words to him now. "You said that we needed to sort the paperwork to make life easier. You were right. But the name that should have been protected first in that paperwork. I understand now who that was." I pulled an envelope from my bag. I handed it to Mark. "This is the last piece of paperwork that has anything to do with you." Mark opened it. Inside was a copy of a protective order application. He looked at it with wide eyes. I said firmly, "From now on, our lives go completely separate ways." Mark slowly nodded. Tears formed in his eyes. "I guess I finally have to stand on my own." I stood up. The sound of rising from the bench creaked. Looking down at Mark one last time, I said, "When you saw me as paperwork, I became someone unloved. But now I've learned how to protect myself with my own paperwork." Walking out of the park, I breathed in the cold air. I didn't look back. Time passed. I began participating in a senior estate annual workshop held at the Tacoma Community Center. At first I went to learn, but later I started sharing my own story. When I stood at the front of the classroom, elderly men and women looked at me. I held the microphone and said, "Everyone, love is wonderful. But before you stamp anything, check the title and loans first. You need to see exactly where and how your name appears." One elderly woman raised her hand and asked, "So we can't even trust family?" I smiled and answered, "Trust your family, but verify the paperwork separately. Love and law are different things." As I left the classroom, one elderly woman followed me and said, "Your story. It felt like my life. Thank you." Hearing those words, I finally let out a long breath. The pain I'd suffered was helping someone else. I came home and opened the window of my townhouse. The end of winter air came in. Cold but refreshing. I stood in the living room and looked around my house. This space with only my name on it. This piece I didn't have to share with anyone. That's when I remembered Mark constantly talking about paperwork. I muttered to myself, "Because you talked about paperwork so much back then." I ended up learning how to protect my own name. Outside the window, I could see Tacoma's waterfront. Sunlight sparkled on the waves. I made one final silent vow. Everyone, on the first line of every document in our lives. Let's engrave our own names clearly, not someone else's. Thinking those words, I made myself a cup of tea. Warm steam rose from it. I sat on the couch and looked out the window. Now this house was entirely mine. A space I'd protected with my name, with my own strength. That fact seeped warmly deep into my heart. I smiled and took a sip of tea. Then said quietly, "This is just the beginning, Helen. The real beginning of my life." Everyone, have any of you ever had a marriage you trusted collapse in an instant like mine did? Through all of this, I learned that I must protect my own name and dignity before any kind of love. I realized it late, but it is not too late. And we still have the courage and hope to begin again. If you have similar wounds or thoughts, please feel free to quietly share them in the comments, so we can be a comfort to one another. If my story has stayed with you, I would be grateful if you could support me with a subscription and a like. And if someone comes to mind, I hope you might gently share this video with them. Thank you sincerely for listening to the end. And I wish that your health and peace stay with you for a very long time.